something called the mini mental status exam. That's really just a fancy way of saying that I wanted to make sure that she was alert and oriented to, we call it person, place, and time. That means she knew who she was, she knew who I was, she knew where we were, and she knew the date. That way I can ensure that she's able to participate in the evaluation and understand what's happening. I then administered something called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2. The 2 means that it's the second edition, and this is something we call an objective measure. So it asks 567 questions, more statements, and the person either agrees or disagrees with them, how much the statement represents them. And this test has been around since 1943. There are more than 10,000 studies showing that it is appropriate for determining somebody's personality traits. It measures all of those things I sort of mentioned, how a person thinks, feels, and behaves in multiple different aspects of their lives. It also measures very accurately any signs of mental illness or dysfunction. And the reason I also really like this test, whenever you're using a test for an evaluation that's going to be used in a forensic setting, people have a lot of incentive to present themselves in a way that's going to benefit their case. And they may want to look like they're sicker than they really are. They may want to look much healthier than they really are. And some of those incentives, they may not even realize that they're intending to do that. So it can be conscious or unconscious, but you really need to have a test that can check for that. And the MMPI 2 has a set of validity scales, we call them. These are scales that measure really the truthfulness and accuracy with which a person is approaching the test. And these scales on this particular test have been so well researched over many decades that they've become very nuanced, and they can tell us a lot about if somebody's, for instance, exaggerating. Are they elevating one of the scales that shows that they're exaggerating on purpose? Are they exaggerating in a manner that's more like a cry for help? Are they exaggerating in a manner that's clever and sophisticated or more obvious? And then the same exact thing goes for trying to minimize symptoms. We have a number of scales that can show us all the different, if somebody's trying to say they're the most wonderful person on earth, or if they're just trying to deny problems, and if they're doing that again in a very clever way or more of an obvious way. So that test was my choice for this case. There's one other reason I'd like to add, is that part of my evaluation was, one of the reasons was to assess whether Ms. Heard has post-traumatic stress disorder, which I told you about earlier, as a result of the incidents that she's alleged occurred by Mr. Depp. And that's a really tough disorder to find out if somebody's faking it or not. It's one of the most easily faked disorders. Most of us know what it feels like to feel anxious. And a lot of people have seen war movies and movies that depict somebody having PTSD. In fact, some research has shown that if you give someone a diagnostic checklist and said, show that you have PTSD, they can do it 96% of the time, just someone on the street. So you really need a test that's very sensitive to that. And the MMPI 2 has been shown in multiple studies to be excellent at detecting those attempts.
Okay, you keep using MMPI 2. That's the abbreviation that you folks use for?
I'm sorry if I hadn't said that. That's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory.
Okay. What other psychological testing did you perform?
So I also performed the clinician-administered PTSD scale, -5, and that -5 links it to the diagnosis for PTSD in our current diagnostic manual, the 5th version. To do that test, you first administer something called the Life Events Checklist. And the Life Events Checklist, both of these tests, by the way, were developed by the National Center for PTSD with the Department of Veterans Affairs. But the Life Events Checklist lists 16 different very stressful life events that people can go through that are often, can be associated with developing PTSD. And then it also has a 17th item that you can fill in if you feel like you've been through something really difficult that wasn't included. Now, I like to also add something called the Life Events Checklist 5 interview, which digs a little bit deeper into the person's childhood as well to find out if what sort of there's so many different things that can be difficult growing up. And also, it's very important that you have the person determine which of the events they've listed, let's say they have a number of different types of traumas, which one do they feel like was the most traumatic for them? Which one still causes them to feel distress when they talk about it? And sometimes they can't just identify one. And then that leads to your next decision. So if they have multiple different similar types of events, like seeing combat, then you might use that as the worst one, the multiple similar. So that looks like you describe an anchor, we call it, to do the testing, and we would maybe describe the anchor as the worst of my combat experience, okay? Now, if somebody had multiple different traumas from different times in their life, like childhood abuse, and then went to combat and had some horrible things happen there, you would do the clinician-administered PTSD scale test, the one that comes after. You do one for the childhood event and a separate one for the adulthood event.
Does this clinician-administered PTSD scale have a handy abbreviation?
It does.
Okay.
We'll call it the CAPS-5. That's actually what it goes by.
Okay. How common is the use of the MMPI-2 in your profession?
The MMPI-2 is actually the most commonly used assessment worldwide by mental health professionals and in forensic settings for the court.
Why'd you use it?
I used it for that purpose and for its excellent validity in those settings, across genders, across ethnicities, for different reasons. And when I keep saying validity, by the way, what I mean is accuracy, and I'll try to work that in. But then also for detecting the accuracy with which a person reports PTSD.
Okay. Is that scaled in some way?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Does that make use of a scale in some way?
The MMPI-2, do you mean specifically for PTSD?
Yes.
There's actually a combination of scales you want to look for. You would never make the diagnosis just based on one scale alone, or even on the test alone. You'd integrate other data.
All right. How did you administer the MMPI-2 to Ms. Heard?
I provided her the test on an iPad. She essentially had her own little desk area and then an iPad. She hits start, it provides her with the instructions, and then it gives her 567 statements in order. For each one, she taps true or false.
What did you learn about Ms. Heard from the results of the MMPI-2?
Quite a bit. I wrote up a 25-page interpretation outline. It has numerous scales. So one of the reasons I like this measure so much is that it can tell you so much about multiple different traits and tendencies and mental issues. One of the primary things I learned was that she had a very sophisticated way of minimizing any personal problems. I also learned that she tends to, well, there were a number of characteristics that were consistent with the eventual diagnoses, but some of the primary characteristics, and I'm going to try to condense 25 pages here, were essentially externalization of blame, tending to have a lot of inner hostility that is attempted to be controlled, a tendency to be very self-righteous, but to also deny that self-righteousness and to judge others critically against these sort of high standards for moral value, but also to deny doing that, essentially to claim that one is very non-judgmental and accepting and yet very full of rage, really. And these aren't facts, but her scores essentially correlated, so they were consistent with other people who obtained these scores who have been shown through many studies to have these very specific traits. So externalization of blame, a lot of inner anger and hostility, sometimes that anger among these groups with similar scores, these people might have that anger kind of explode out at times. They tend to be very passive-aggressive. They may be self-indulgent, very self-centered. They could use manipulation tactics to try to get their needs met, very needy of attention, acceptance, approval. They tend to distance people who are close to them. Initially, they may seem very charming. They're very socially sophisticated, actually. That was a major component on there. They have a capacity to kind of offer some of their faults, but in a way, but only the ones that people think of lightly and can all relate to. And so they can present as very fair and balanced, but in actuality, they really might be very judgmental of others and unaware of problems in their behavior and their thinking.
So after you provide the examination via the iPad, what do you do?
So once they've completed the test, you can have it scored by the computer immediately. It's a very, very complex test to interpret, but right away you get a list of what's called critical items. And these are just some, a couple of the items, the statements that are presented that are more clearly symptom-based. And I always follow up with the examinee. Some of these might have to do with suicide. Some of them might have to do with other symptoms that you just like to get a little bit more information on, because sometimes an examinee might tell you they're completely fine when you're doing your interview with them and that they have no symptoms. And then when they take the test, it says that they're having trouble sleeping, or they struggle with nausea all the time, or they feel very anxious. And so you want to follow up on that.
Okay. What's a code type?
A code type, let me think of how to explain this very, very simply. So the main scales, and I keep referring to scales, these are just the main scores that come up on this test. We can refer to them as codes. And when I was saying that Ms. Heard's scores could be compared to certain groups of people that had been researched before to obtain similar scores, the research has shown that certain people will have certain scores that kind of spike on this, okay? And so all of those traits that I was describing, those are traits that are found in these code types. So it means that score number two was high, and score number 6 was high. And so if we have those two scores were both high, then that's a 2-6 code type. And these code types...
What code type was Ms. Heard?
Ms. Heard had, the clearest code type was 3-6, but then she also had some other code types that were less significant.
What characteristics are associated with a 3-6 code type?
So a 3-6 code type, a lot of that anger is expressed in this code type. There can be actually a lot of cruelty, usually with people who are less powerful. Actually, when you see this code type, you want to, if you can, to follow up with subordinates, co-workers, people who may have observed their behavior more closely. The 3-6 code type is very concerned with their image, very attention-seeking, very prone to externalizing blame to a point where it's unclear whether they can even admit to themselves that they do have responsibility in certain areas. A lot of suppressed and denied anger, but the anger is very present, will explode out, and a lot of issues in their close relationships.
How does Ms. Heard's code type fit in with your overall opinion as to personality disorders?
Well, this might be an appropriate time to describe a little bit about these personality disorders, because I think what you'll hear is that there's a lot of consistency there. So borderline personality disorder is a disorder of stability. It's instability, and it's instability in personal relationships, it's instability in their emotions, it's instability in their behavior, and it's instability in their sense of self and their identity. And that instability is really driven by this underlying terror of abandonment. So one of the key features also of this disorder, and all of it is like pistons of an engine kind of firing off and igniting one another. But when somebody is afraid of being abandoned by their partner or by anybody else in their environment and they have this disorder, they'll make desperate attempts to prevent that from happening. And those desperate attempts could be physical aggression, it could be threatening, it could be harming themselves. But these are behaviors that are usually very extreme and very concerning to the people around them. The anger is typically what, sadly, it's counteractive, right? So the thing these people fear most is being abandoned, but over time, the anger, the explosive anger that they show when somebody is needing space, or when somebody's really not doing anything wrong, because a lot of times they read into things that they perceive as being a slight to them or being somebody intending to harm them that actually isn't happening. They'll exaggerate it, and they'll explode. They'll react in this heightened manner that is just exhausting for their partners. Oftentimes their partners will try to make them happy at first and really allow themselves to be a punching bag, thinking that they can somehow solve this problem, that somehow they can make this better. And eventually it just overwhelms them. Histrionic personality disorder is very
Before
similar.
we move on to that,
Okay.
Are you familiar with the term emotional reactivity?
I am.
What is that?
So emotional reactivity is very common in the diagnosis. So essentially, like I said, there's instability in emotions. People with borderline personality disorder are often misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder because they can be up and down. They can look very depressed, then they can look very elated, but these changes are happening within a matter of hours. Somebody with bipolar disorder, this is a clinical depression lasting days, weeks, a clinical mania where sometimes they even need to be hospitalized because they're so grandiose. They clear out their bank account and go to Vegas and spend it all. They're acting in some very bizarre ways. With borderline personality disorder, you're having these fluctuating moods constantly. And again, this hypersensitivity to being slighted or feeling offended, really driven by the fear that if you're offended or slighted, if the therapist comes in 2 minutes late, or if somebody shows up to dinner 2 minutes late, that they might be abandoning you. And it's not as if the borderline is considering themselves abandoned in that moment, but they just know that they have this overwhelming emotion, and there are no attempts to control that emotion. There are no attempts to regulate it. So if they're in the middle of the restaurant and they feel offended, they're going to start the fight. People are going to see it, or they might just start crying or break down, but they'll make a lot of accusations, and that reactivity is when you're going to see a lot of this escalation in the bizarre behavior. They can react violently, they can react aggressively, they will often physically prevent their partner from trying to leave if their partner wants to get space from all of this intense emotion, and oftentimes they will be abusive to their partners in these situations. Sometimes they'll physically restrain them from leaving and become injured that way, but also people with borderline personality disorder, it seems to be a predictive factor for women who implement violence against their partner. And one of the most common tactics that they'll use is actually physically assaulting and then getting harmed themselves. But mostly, we call this administrative violence. So essentially, this is saying that they'll make threats using the legal system. So they might say that they are going to file a restraining order or claim abuse, or they might do these things to essentially try to keep their partner from leaving. In the moment, again, they're not consciously thinking, I'm going to keep my partner from leaving right now. They're just thinking, I can't stand this. I hate my partner. They went from idealizing to suddenly devaluing because of the hurt, and they'll do anything to express that big emotion of anger.
Your Honor, may we approach?
All right, yes, sir.
Okay. You indicated you were talking about emotional reactivity. What, if any, emotional reactivity did you observe in your review? And let's do this one at a time.
Okay. So there were a couple indications to me. First, I can sort of think about it with the treatment records. So particularly Dr. Cohen-Connell's, am I getting the name right? I feel like for some reason in my mind I might have just reversed it. But Dr. Cohen's records, I did reverse it. He actually refers to this reactivity quite a bit and to Ms. Heard's temper. And that temper, it's often branded, or being hot-headed, is really characteristic of borderline personality disorder, as is their very charming, personable nature. This is a disorder of contradictions. In Nurse Filati's notes, I thought there was something interesting. She references a night when they're out to dinner, I believe in London, and she provided positive reinforcement to Ms. Heard because Ms. Heard had been disappointed by a mistake made by the server, and it sort of references how previously she might have criticized the server or become upset by that, and that she didn't this time, and so that had been some sort of a step forward. And there was also an indication actually in Dr. Hughes's, Dr. Hughes is a forensic psychologist who had been appointed by Ms. Heard to conduct as an evaluation as well. In Ms. Hughes's interview of Ms. Heard disclosed that she had cut her arm in the past, which is a typical reactive type thing somebody with this diagnosis can do. It's one of the symptoms. And that's sort of all I can think of top of my mind from the treatment records. Moving into some of the declarations or deposition testimony, what struck me was Ms. Raquel Pennington's testimony. She's a former friend of Ms. Heard's, and she told a story about, I suppose, they were shopping for Thanksgiving accoutrements, something to prepare for Thanksgiving, and Ms. Heard struck her in the face, sort of out of the blue, which is I thought was interesting because that is one of those signs of borderline personality disorder where if a friend or a loved one isn't meeting your needs in that moment, people with borderline personality disorder can be very caring in their relationships as long as their needs are being met. They feel that their needs should be met when they want them met at a specific level, and if they're not, then that anger, that sense of harm causes them to react. So the striking Ms. Pennington's report in the declaration or the testimony, I thought was pretty consistent. And then Ms. Heard's own self-descriptions.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question about.
Sure.
You indicated Ms. Pennington was a former friend of Ms. Heard. Is there a relationship between borderline personality disorder and intimate relationships?
Yes, so the instability definitely translates to their relationships. You'll see relationships start very intensely. Somebody with borderline personality disorder perceives the relationship as extremely close. This pattern of idealizing and devaluing is definitely at play. They do this with their lovers and also with their friends. And so this might be the perfect person, their perfect soulmate friend, perfect soulmate partner, and their engagement in the relationship is very alluring, very charming to the other person. And so initially everything seems great. But what occurs is that reality sets in. People are not perfect, even when we have a lot in common with them. Whereas most of us can accept somebody as a whole, somebody who has a little bit of flaws, and still think this is my great friend who always constantly running late for dinner. The person with borderline personality disorder, things are in these extremes, this black and white, we call it splitting. And so that person goes from being idealized, the perfect person, to dumpster. They are totally devalued. They are the worst friend. They don't care anything about me. I have better people around. And then there will be a repair, because the person with this disorder does feel remorseful after they have these reactions, angry, tell their friend off. But over time, it wears away at these relationships. And so what you'll usually see is many transitions in their friendships over the years, people who have sort of fallen by the wayside, who were really very close-knit at one time, and then, but there's not a lot of consistency in the long term. You'll also see that with their intimate relationships, many relationships, but none that are particularly long-term.
How does borderline personality disorder relate to identity issues?
So again, that instability also travels toward identity. And when I was describing personality earlier, I was talking a little bit about those traits we have that help us know who we are. When you have borderline personality disorder, that actually is not something you understand. So people with this disorder actually take on the identity of the people they're spending time with because it's comforting. It's very uncomfortable to not know who you are. Some people with this disorder will describe a feeling of emptiness when they feel like they've been abandoned because now they don't know who they are in the world. And so when somebody with this disorder is going through that initial enmeshment phase with new people and they're idealizing them, they often will take on the identities of those people. So they may mimic them in a lot of ways. They might mimic the way they dress, their interests, the way they talk. And for this reason, the people around somebody with this disorder kind of from the outside may feel like, wait, I thought you were this way, now you're advocating for this, and this is your new main interest in life, or the thing you're throwing yourself into all completely. Music tastes might change, hobbies will change, the way they dress.
Okay. In addition to borderline personality disorder, I understand that you diagnosed another personality disorder. What's that?
So histrionic personality disorder, and these are really two sides of the same coin. They belong to the same cluster. We call these clusters. It's a way to organize personality disorders in that DSM. And this cluster is described as the personality disorders that are dramatic, erratic, and emotional. Okay, so unpredictable, but really having to do with emotions and relationships. They're very similar. Whereas I was saying that borderline personality disorder, a lot of the key features that you're going to notice are instability. When it comes to histrionic, a lot of the key features are going to be drama and shallowness. Similarly, with borderline personality disorder, there's this underlying drive of avoiding abandonment. With histrionic personality disorder, that underlying drive is to always be the center of attention. Because if you don't have that attention on you, it feels similarly to borderline personality disorder. You feel pretty empty, like you don't have that sense of being or of value, okay? So whereas borderline personality disorder might have more of the visible reactivity if somebody seems to be leaving, with histrionic personality disorder, what you're going to see is extreme discomfort with not being the center of attention, extreme efforts to be the center of attention, and when they feel that they're not the center of attention, you will see some strange things, making up stories to try to get attention, often taking on a victim or princess role. Those two roles in particular are pretty consistent. Seeking caretaking. Borderline personality disorder is similar because with borderline personality disorder, these shifts of identity and the splitting, you might see somebody go from being, in the DSM it describes it as a needy supplicant of help, seeking the perfect caretaker, to suddenly being the avenger against injustice or thinking that their partner is a terrible person. With histrionic, what you'll see is somebody who wants to be the center of attention, has sort of that impressionistic speech, very flowery, very enthusiastic, but nothing's really being said. The moment your attention wears away, because they're so demanding for attention, that's when they might take the victim role or the princess role and even make up stories. Sometimes those stories are to bolster the victim role. Sometimes those stories are just to make them look more interesting or accomplished in their mind so that they can get respect and attention that way.
Is there a relation between histrionic personality disorder and attractiveness?
There is, strangely, and this is always one of the trickiest things to talk about because how is that a symptom? But characteristically, people with this disorder are very, very interested in looks, but more importantly, they utilize their looks to get that attention, to get that respect that they're seeking. And so this type of a personality might be flirtatious with everybody. Characteristically, they actually couldn't even be subtly, and when I say flirtatious, I'm not talking overtly sexy, but kind of inappropriately flattering. Sometimes they act in a kind of a girlish way to be cute and to engender attention. And this will even occur in their therapy relationships as a way to sort of avoid getting negative feedback or criticism. Oftentimes they'll bring the therapist gifts or be distracting if they engage in therapy because they just don't want any criticism. They want the therapist to like them.
Does the intelligence of the affected person bear on the manner in which these disorders present?
Excuse me, I choked a little on my water. Yes, and I think one way to think about it that's probably a little more accurate than just intelligence is, in psychology, we would describe this more as sophistication. So street smarts, so to speak. The way, for instance, I've had many clients who have borderline personality disorder who are messy and really clearly suffering, and they might be difficult and all over the place and yell at you in the middle of a session, but it's so, it's not tailored. It's so much easier to work with because of that just openness and rawness of it, genuineness. Sometimes you'll have a more sophisticated presentation. There are 9 symptoms and only 5 have to be met. So there are a lot of different combinations and different ways it can present. And sometimes you'll have more of a petulant version of this where it really shows when you push the button and you're kind of, whoa, what was that? So somebody who's really productive, high functioning, successful, and you get to know them and you think they're fantastic because they're so interested in you too. And you might not realize it, but they're mimicking you perfectly. So you're really just kind of falling in love with this new friend who is being you. But then all of a sudden, you say something that they think is offensive, and you can't, even in your wildest thoughts, understand how that could have offended somebody, but their reaction is so strong that you kind of buy into it. Gosh, maybe I did say something offensive, and you feel bad about it. So that sophisticated version, they can be a little bit more calculated in the way they present. They tend to kind of hit you where it hurts a little bit more, and they can be actually very, very destructive.
What conclusions were you able to draw about Ms. Heard's sophistication from her testing?
Well, from her testing and from her presentation, she was very likable, but her testing in particular showed that she approached it in a manner that, remember I told you about those scales that are pretty neat. She approached it in a manner that very clearly minimized any psychological dysfunction, not just that, but really presented herself as free of any problems. And she did so in a way that was very, very sophisticated, not obvious, by responding to questions that most people might not notice were trying to detect that.
How did you determine that?
So that's based on a particular scale on the MMPI-2 that is designed specifically to detect a type of responding that's a little bit more clever, a little bit more sophisticated, minimizing problems in a way that most lay people probably wouldn't understand, and even providers, very difficult to detect.
You mentioned that one of the characteristics of borderline personality disorder is emotional reactivity. How might that present in an intimate relationship?
So I think it probably presents mostly, or you'd see the bulk of it in intimate relationships because of that regular interaction and the desire for your partner to meet all of your needs, to be the perfect caretaker. Also that the hallmark of the disorder with the splitting, so idealizing, devaluing, and the perceiving of all sorts of neutral events as somehow demeaning or disrespectful. It's regular escalations of anger, frustrated complaints, criticisms of your partner. But because the person with borderline personality disorder, first of all, they're more sensitive to things, they feel distress more strongly, and then that distress lasts longer. So these types of blow-ups go on forever, and they're very cyclic. It feels like you just can't get a resolution, and eventually the partner will try to leave, will want to leave to take a break. It wears them down, and that's when the borderline might explode and act very aggressively or violently to try to prevent them from leaving.
In addition to diagnosing Ms. Heard with these two personality disorders, did you form another opinion about Ms. Heard's mental status?
Yes, so go ahead.
If the answer to that is yes, I'm going to now ask you,
okay,
what
yes,
was that?
I did.
Okay, what is it?
So in addition to looking for Ms. Heard's general mental status, any psychological issues that were present, I very specifically was assessing to determine whether post-traumatic stress disorder was present, and it was not.
How do you know that?
So first of all, from multiple information sources, right? So I was integrating the interview, my review of the data, the case records, other people's testimony, her treatment records. And then I also conducted, in addition to the MMPI-2 and looking at that data, I also conducted the clinician-administered PTSD scale, the CAPS-5, which is the gold standard PTSD assessment developed by the National Center for PTSD, shown to be valid, accurate for use not just with service members, but also with civilians, men, women, all genders, and also all ethnicities, and then also specifically for use in a courtroom setting.
How do you conduct the CAPS-5?
So the CAPS-5 is a standard interview. What that means is that it's an interview with very clear questions that are scripted, and you ask those same questions every time you test a person. So because you're doing that, you're actually taking something that would typically be kind of subjective, an interview with somebody, and you're making it more objective. When you ask those same questions in the same way every time somebody's assessed with this, now you can apply a scoring protocol and actually score their responses.
Okay. As a result of applying those protocols, what did you conclude?
Ms. Heard did not have PTSD, and there were also pretty significant indications that she was grossly exaggerating symptoms of PTSD when asked about them.
How did you make that latter conclusion?
So one of the strengths of this test, as I mentioned, the important thing about any test used when you're doing an evaluation in forensics is to make sure that the person is responding accurately. And this test does that by not just asking people whether they have a symptom, but asking follow-up questions that draw out very detailed accounts of every single symptom of PTSD. And when you're really familiar with this disorder, which you need to be to administer this test, there are nuances in the way a person will describe their symptoms that have been shown repeatedly to indicate exaggeration or faking. There are also indications when somebody is clearly giving you a genuine response.
Okay. What, if any, symptoms of PTSD did you observe in Ms. Heard?
So there are 20 kind of core symptoms that somebody can manifest with PTSD. You don't have to have all of them. Ms. Heard initially said that she had in the first question you say, do you ever have this, before you get to the more nuanced follow-up questions. When I asked that first question on each item, she initially said, yes, I have that, to 19 of the 20 symptoms. That's not typical even of somebody with the most disabling form of PTSD. When we eventually sort of dialed it down, she had 3 remaining symptoms. And having symptoms of any disorder is common for all of us. Some of us struggle with sleep. Some of us get anxious. It could be several different disorders. It could just be that you have this struggle in your life. But she had 3 specific symptoms that I scored as present. Off the top of my head, I might miss one, but one was sleep disturbance. So she reported that she has frequent nightmares. Another one was that she said that she tends to have a startle response. So if she gets startled or surprised, she tends to stay in sort of a hyper startle mode for quite a while. And that's consistent with a couple of things. It can be consistent with PTSD if other criteria are met. It's also consistent with childhood complex trauma, which is something that can occur when your brain is forming. If you constantly feel unsafe, if your parents are abusive, or if they're not present, if you're neglected, you can develop certain physiological responses that can stay for a long time in your life. So I noted that seemed like a very genuine, accurate account where she stays in the state of kind of hyper arousal, has a hard time calming down if she gets surprised.
You mentioned nightmares as well.
Yes.
Did she recount for you the nature of the nightmares?
So they were vague. She indicated that she has recurrent nightmares and that she feels as though she's being held down. There was some conflict in that account because even though that could be a PTSD symptom, it is fairly vague, but I still scored it as present. And in her initial treatment with with Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, which I believe started before she began dating Mr. Depp, she had indicated to Dr. Jacobs, according to Dr. Jacobs's notes, that she was having repetitive nightmares back then and that they were related to her childhood trauma. And so that came up several times in the notes. Dr. Jacobs kept mentioning that.
Thank you. What is feigning?
Feigning is essentially faking or exaggerating symptoms that aren't present.
Does the CAPS-5 control for that?
It doesn't necessarily control for it. It can expose it by drawing out.
How does that work?
Because you're not just simply handing the person a checklist that says, here are all the symptoms of PTSD. Why don't just check off the ones you have, which clearly if you're trying to look like you have PTSD, you would just check them all. The CAPS-5, because it requires them to describe in detail how they experience the symptom, where it shows up, what it looks like, what sort of examples they can give you, how many times it's happened in the last couple weeks, how many times it's happened in the last month. By the end of each symptom, you've gotten a very good picture of a couple things. One, does it meet the definition of the symptom? Are they getting it right? Is this actually the symptom, or are they kind of confusing this with something else? Number 2, are they giving you very vague accounts? Are they giving you kind of a stereotyped idea of what the symptom is based on media or movies or something that actually is completely different from genuine experiences of this symptom? Or are they giving you a very genuine, heartfelt, sometimes minimizing, but it's ticking all the boxes? Their mannerisms while they're describing it, the actual very specific, very nuanced, symbolic ways they're describing it. A lot of times it smells, it sounds. That all appears in genuine accounts, and it's something that people really get wrong when they're feigning.
All right. In addition to your conclusion that Ms. Heard does not have PTSD, did you make a conclusion with respect to her symptoms?
Yes, actually I did. So, just because somebody doesn't have PTSD doesn't mean that they weren't harmed psychologically by whatever is being alleged, in this case, Ms. Heard is alleging that she was psychologically harmed and that she suffered PTSD because of abuse that she alleges occurred by Mr. Depp. So the MMPI too is helpful because it shows you kind of everything, any other symptoms. And then in Ms. Heard's own self-report and her prior treatment records, I knew that she had reported to me that she had had some other symptoms. So now what becomes really important is determining, and let me clarify one thing here, not so much a diagnosis, but did she start to experience symptoms during the relationship and after? Did they worsen after? Or could these types of symptoms or reports be explained by other factors? A, by feigning, B, by pre-existing conditions, or C, by other stressful life events that might have occurred. So the main symptoms that I was looking at didn't meet criteria for PTSD, right? There was also substantial evidence of this sort of emotional dysregulation, emotional disorganization, the shallowness, the dramatic affect. Now, when you have a lot of childhood trauma, you can actually have some similar type presentation in adulthood. There are some differences though, but also that's not something that would have occurred after this relationship. So now I was looking at, are there indications that these types of things that she's described, this transient anxiety, the issues with sleep, were these there prior? And sure enough, Ms. Heard, in her own self-report, stated to me that when she first got to LA, she was seeking treatment for, in her words, blanket anxiety and depression. She also reported that she was taking medications. In general, none of them were helpful. That's actually very typical of borderline personality disorder. Medications typically aren't very helpful for somebody with the disorder. They really need an intensive, lifelong type of therapy, which is not necessarily as relevant to this. But interestingly also, people with borderline personality disorder often respond really positively to stimulant medications that are given for ADD or ADHD. And in one of Nurse Filati's notes, she reported that Ms. Heard told her that none of the medications were working for her except for one Provigil, which is often prescribed as stimulant medication. And I just thought that was interesting and sort of consistent with more of these lifelong personality disorders that aren't necessarily caused by a harm by any allegations, but have been there and will remain there typically. The other issue, so the anxiety, she had already indicated that had been there prior, but the form of the anxiety. So looking at Dr. Hughes's testing and then also looking at the scores on the MMPI, when you look at all these little combinations of the scores, you can actually learn a lot about, is the anxiety related to an event, or is this more a person who tends to be an anxious person regardless of what's going on in their life? And somebody might describe them as a worrywart. And the scores, the little combination of scores that she obtained actually indicated that it was the latter, that her anxiety tends to be separate from events and more just kind of a constant, and it comes and goes, but it's more of a trait.
I have no further questions for this witness.
All right. Maybe why don't we go ahead and, Ms. Bray, go ahead and have our lunch break. It might be a good idea to break it up there. Okay, I know. I can see you jumping up. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take our lunch recess. Just again, do not do any outside research and don't discuss the case with anybody, okay? And we'll have you back here. And again, Dr. Curry, since you're in the middle of your testimony, please do not discuss your testimony with anybody at this time, okay? All right, let's just, when we come back at 1:50, okay? Come back at 1:50? All right, thank you.